today we are going to discuss Tagore's early experience. You would recall in an earlier lecture, we had given the context within which Tagore was writing, the larger social, historical, colonial experience. But now today we are going to begin with his own personal experience, which was not, of course, totally disconnected with the larger historical experience. And I would like to allude to another text we did in this series on C. Wright Mills, The Sociological Imagination, where he talked about the importance to link biographies and histories. Let's begin now with Tagore's early experience. Even during his early years, when he insisted on accompanying his brothers to school, Tagore became very aware of how school life was. "You are crying to go to school now," said one brother. "You will soon cry much more to stay at home." This is very, very true for particularly people of an older generation, say even me, that you would want to go to school, but when you went into that disciplined environment of the school, you said, "My God, if only I could be at home." And soon Rabindranath found out that school was another prison, much more dreary than home, and he named it his Andamans when he looked back on those days. Andaman, the islands as people which were desolate, completely cut off from everything you know, a kind of prison, an association with prison, which he often drew attention to when he talked about school. And here I am sort of giving headings to these presentations from his quotes directly. He described the schools that he went to as a child, hard-benched, dull, prison-like walls. The rooms were cruelly dismal, with their walls on guard like policemen. The house was more like a pigeon-holed box than a human habitation. Look at the language that he goes as a child. He recalls many decades later that the rooms were so cruelly dismal. They were not attractive. The child would be petrified. You felt the walls were imprisoning you, guarding you, preventing you from running away. The house was more like a pigeon-holed box than a human habitation. No decoration, no pictures, not a touch of color, not an attempt to attract the boyish heart. The fact that likes and dislikes form a large part of the child's mind was completely ignored. So everything was dull, everything was boring. And for Tagore, he felt that childhood, the child was, dying for adventure, dying to explore the world, curious, and you had a school which, instead of encouraging that curiosity, would be a sure guarantee of ensuring that the curiosity dies, that from being a curious, restless child, a child becomes disciplined and disinterested. Very, very unfortunate. Not a touch of color. Naturally, our whole being was depressed as we steeped through the doorway into the narrow quadrangle, and playing truant became chronic with us, that you didn't want to go to school. You know how many children who would get up in the morning and say, "I have a stomach ache, I don't want to go to school, I'm not feeling." And why is this? Very often we say that you just don't want to school, but we don't want to understand what is it about school which would put off the child so much. Whereas at one point the child was wanting to school. Hard benches and dull, prison-like walls of schools used to confine children from 10 to 4, like the major part of the day when you should be having fun, exploring, discovering new knowledge. You are confined from 10 to 4 on your hard benches. There is another aspect to education, particularly school education, which Tagore draws attention to: punishment. When a child could not repeat a lesson, he was punished very severely. The master, says Rabindranath, looked like a cane incarnate. The textbooks of English that were common at that time and persisted for more than half a century thereafter made matters worse too. There are two things he's looking at. One is the teacher. The teacher seemed representing the cane. The teacher didn't seem to be a kind, interested, alive human being. The teacher behaved like a cane incarnate. And the books, he says, the books were so unattractive. The books had no illustrations and they had ugly looking words spelled with divided syllables and accent marks like raised bayonets, and completed the dreariness of the whole pursuit. Interestingly, there are attempts now, not just in private schools but also in government schools, to make the school attractive. Children need attraction. Look at the way a child will look at a flower, a tree, at the breeze, at the wind. In fact, when adults have little children, their own or even grandchildren, it's almost, many of them say, it's like discovering the world again. What seems so routinized, so dull, is given another kind of lease of life by the curiosity that children have. The way that child would look at rain, the way a child would look at a moon, is not how we adults, whose habits have been dulled, that we are no longer look at either the nature or at the social in any curious, interesting fashion. He then describes the teacher, and he said the short temper, the injustice. Look at the critique of Tagore. He is not eulogizing, he is not pontificating. He is not saying, like, a teacher is a guru, you must follow everything that the teacher does. He is capturing the child's experience when the teacher would show his short temper, would be so unequal and discriminatory, would be so impatient. In his childhood, Tagore used to play act as a teacher in front of wooden benches of the house. I don't know whether children do anything like this in this world of electronic gadgets and very different kinds of hobbies. But even in my childhood, we would often play act the child. We would act like the teacher, make our younger siblings or cousins sit down and act like the teacher. And what was probably very striking about acting like the teacher, that you had to act authoritatively. You had to be a little bit of a dictator, a little bit of a tyrant, a little bit of a tin pot dictator, and warn that I will punish you if you do not do this. I have the power to do this. And Tagore then makes this very wonderful observation, and I quote, "I have since realized how much easier it is to acquire the manner than the matter." Please pay attention. It is so much easier to acquire the manner rather than the matter. That is, if I want to be a teacher in an authoritarian fashion, I must acquire the manner of looking important, looking dictatorial, looking grim, looking profound. And I don't look into the matter that should I study, what book should I read, what should I explore, what should be my educational vision. That is the matter of a teacher, and that I neglect, and I acquire all the mannerisms of how important I should look as a teacher, how the student should be deferential to me. I again repeat it because it captures issues which are relevant even today in 2020. I have since realized how much easier it is to acquire the manner rather than the matter. Without an effort, I had assimilated all the impatience, the short temper, the partiality, the injustice displayed by my teachers to the exclusion of the rest of their teaching. So he says, I don't really recall what they taught. I don't remember what they taught. But I remembered that to be a teacher, you must be partial, you must be short-tempered, and you must be generally unjust and discriminatory to your students. He brings another. He's already referred to the role of the teacher. He has referred to the dull classrooms and the dull books. He brings in another point extremely relevant in the contemporary context, the question of masses of information. I was asked to accept masses of information for which I was not in the least ready. Nature has methods of its own in these matters, but my schoolmasters had theirs, which were quite different. In the fight between us, we children suffered excruciating pain. We children suffered. That is, he says that there is a certain natural orientation of the young and the children to learn. For example, all of us learn to speak, right? We learn how to stand, we learn how to play, we learn how to run. How do we do it? Nobody teaches that in a forceful fashion. We learn it when mothers sing lullabies to us. We learn how to stand by looking at our older siblings. We look, we observe, we imitate, we explore. And he says that's the natural order of learning. Instead, he says, our education system would pile masses of information, data, lots and lots of information, lots and lots of table, which we're supposed to memorize and reproduce, and that imposition of so much information on the child would lead to a great deal of suffering by the child. Look at all the words he describes when he writes, the eternal grid of the school mill. Rabindranath realized early that not being able to keep up with school routine and the curriculum was not taken very kindly in society. He remembered his sister saying, "We had all hoped that Robbie would grow up to be a man, but he has disappointed us because he didn't like to go to school. He didn't like to be a good student. In fact, he was not a good student." And they felt disappointed, and he realized the value of social legitimacy. You would be familiar in families where people would say so-and-so has topped his class or so-and-so has got this scholarship, and you go around being very proud about it, not realizing the absurdity of that kind of achievement. He also talks about an education which is completely divorced from life and beauty, no connection with the magic of life, with the order of natural beauty. He did not want to get tied to the eternal grind of the school mill, which, divorced as it was from all life and beauty, seems such a hideously cruel combination of hospital and jail. Can you imagine? Here I think the spelling of jail is wrong, but the combination of hospital and jail, disciplined. Think of another thinker, completely different country, much later, Michel Foucault, who talks about the institutions of modernity and talks about the jail and the hospital. And look at the magic of Tagore, that he is making this comparison of the school, social institution, hospital, a medical institution, a jail, a punishment, a law and order institution. The vision of education that Tagore was trying to articulate was completely different. The highest education is that which makes our life in harmony with all existence. That education must be in consonance with our existence, what comes naturally to our predispositions, not in harmony with nature, in harmony with what we desire. Some of us are better at painting, some of us are better at singing, some are terrible at singing but may be very good in mathematics, some of us are terrible in mathematics but may be very good in cooking or in gardening. It has to be in harmony with all our existence. Harmony with all existences can be achieved only when all the faculties of an individual have been developed to an highest pitch of perfection. To attain full manhood is the ultimate end of education. Everything else is subordinate to it. When he uses the word manhood, remember again the context within which he is talking about. He is basically saying full humanhood, because he was one of the persons who was extremely sensitive to the question of women's question and the question of gender discrimination. He is basically saying that we have to build up the human potentials which are again within us. The power of imagination to learn from nature and life. Instead of putting all the burden on memory, rote learning, memorize, we have to cultivate the power of thinking. The power of imagination should also be given opportunities for free exercise. He condemned bookish learning and stressed that we have to learn directly from nature. You will learn more, perhaps, about biology, about botany, if you go and explore the garden, if you go and explore the forest, if you actually try to cultivate, then you will learn from books. The learning cannot be receptive. That is, you can't be passive, sitting here and people are putting information into your mind. A person has to be alert and learn how to do it. The actual find out where is the source of this learning. So when you learn Tagore, when I'm trying to give a lecture on Tagore, just don't receive it. Go back and say, maybe I'm making it all up. Did Tagore really say all that? Can I verify? Can I validate? Can I explore? Can I experiment? That should be the purpose of education. The other aspect, he said, the link between the body and the mind and the natural impulses of childhood. Even if they learned nothing, they would have had ample time for play, climbing trees, diving into ponds, plucking and rearing flowers, penetrating 1,001 mischiefs of Mother Nature. So they said, let them just go into nature, go into the gardens, go into the forest, go in. And they will learn in that process. They learn a lot. Sometimes they may be tearing at the flower, which you may disapprove of, but even that is a part of learning. They may be chasing a little cat, but even that is part of learning. They would have obtained the nourishment of the body, happiness of mind, and the satisfaction of the natural impulses of childhood. He then rues. He feels we have learned, but we have ceased to be human. So we've packed up a lot of knowledge, but we have lost the ability to have what is the humanness. Why am I exactly like you? If my mother is ill, can I feel for you when your mother is ill? If I feel for the death of somebody who belongs to my ethnic community or religious community, do I feel the same pain when somebody else is lost in another community? The idea of being human. Pursuit of knowledge, he said, should be supplemented by living, not by living alone, but loving context. The idea of love, the idea of sharing. The fundamental purpose of education is not just to enrich ourselves through the fullness of knowledge, through information, but also to establish the bond of love and friendship between man and man. Very interesting if you look at even Gandhi. There's a lot of emphasis on friendship, on solidarity, on bonding. And then very, very interesting in the contemporary world where we have so many divisions between different countries and between people in a country, he says that education should be with the purpose of connecting with the lowly, kinship with the lowly, kinship across nations. Very, very profound and pertinent. That is, when we say kinship, we often assume that kinship would mean connection by blood, people who are our relatives, rishtedar. So it's important, but he's saying kinship with people who are not connecting to you, maybe with the poor, the dispossessed, the marginal, people who are not as wealthy as you, people who may be working in the fields, maybe people who are breaking stones. Kinship, even not just with the lowly within quote, but kinship across nations, that with people across the world. There was a very, very strong international and universal and global dimension to Tagore's vision of education. And therefore, the idea of fellow feeling was that not limited to one's own countrymen, but spread the message of internationalism in Tagore's writing. Fellowship, kinship with the lowly and internationalism. So long as we do not come down to the level of the common person and feel the bond of kinship with the poor and the lowly and the lost, Tagore insisted our education would be incomplete. The idea of fellow feeling was limited to one's own countrymen, but spread the message, not limited to only one's own countrymen, but spread the message of internationalism in Tagore's writing. And therefore, Shantiniketan, the idea of Bishwa Bharati, that is international as well as national. This connect was very, very evident in Tagore's writing, but also very, very evident in many of the nationalist writings which defined Indian nationalism, which was not particularistic, which had themes of internationalism, universalism, and most importantly, humanism. We then come to something else related to Tagore's education, the idea of, precision, that this must be the answer to this question. This is right and this is wrong. And he has a very interesting take on the idea of guessing. And I have, given the heading, don't guess, but why not? Don't guess, says the master. That is, the teacher says, don't guess. The teacher gets very angry, asks a question, a child gives some reply, and the teacher says, don't guess. And Tagore says, but why not? Guessing is one of nature's methods of helping us to learn, especially when we are young and we teachers try to kill it. Very often when I teach, and I've been teaching now almost for 3 decades, sometimes I learn so much by the student's response. The student's response may not be accurate, may not be precise, may not be the answer which guidebooks demand of you, but the student's answers are exploratory. It makes you think, it throws light, it gives you a certain perspective to look at different kinds of issues. I say to my pupils, can't you guess? And then I give them 3 or 4 chances. Tagore says he encourages his pupils to guess, and I give them 3 or 4 chances. But the very efficient teachers tell me, this is wrong, this is sin, this is not the right. And I have been in fact, meetings or selection committees and interviews where I have seen people saying, define this, define that. And when the person being interviewed is actually saying something very interesting, something which explores the creativity of that person, you stop that person and say, that's not right, give me that definition which is the bookish knowledge that they have learned. There's another dimension to Tagore's education, again extremely relevant in the contemporary context, about religion of prayers. Tagore was a humanist. Tagore was deeply spiritual. But his spirituality was extremely large, universal, and not bounded by the narrow walls of parochialism. The work of the day began with a prayer. In his school, in his university, it ends with a prayer. The entire life of the school which Tagore began was permeated by a spiritual atmosphere. Yet Tagore did not believe in teaching religion. Teaching of religion can never be imparted in the form of lessons. It is there where there is a religion in living. Religion is not a tractional or a fractional thing that can be doled out in fixed weekly or daily measures as one among various subjects in the school syllabus. It's not about this is right, this is wrong, this is how you should behave, this is not how you should behave. Teaching of religion cannot be imparted in the form of lesson. It is not a fractional thing that today I will teach you this of religion, tomorrow that of religion. For him, religion was lived religion. Religion teaching was living in close contact with people of other faiths. Again, notice he's talking about knowing kinship with the poor, kinship with the international, and now he's talking about living in close contact with people of other faiths. Hence, there was no dogmatic teaching in Shantiniketan. The religious atmosphere of the place helps the pupils to learn to respect the religions other than their own, religions of not my family alone, religions maybe of my friend's family, by living in close contact with boys and teachers and girls of other faiths. Here, the idea of fraternity, which is so central to our constitution, so central to our preamble, becomes so evident here that you must have the idea of brotherhood and sisterhood with other people, irrespective of whether they're rich or poor, irrespective of whether they belong to your religion or not, irrespective of whether they belong to your nation or not. It could be global. He was very interested in education as a fundamental prerequisite of the progress of a nation, and he joined the National Council of Education, which was being attempted at that time to bring about reforms in education. But Tagore's conception of true national education was fundamentally different from the official policy of national education. He welcomed the desire for self-determination in education, but he felt it very inconvenient that you have to have a complete or take orders from a government, take order especially from a foreign government. He appealed to his countrymen to approach national problems in a rational manner and to turn attention to the prime object of national reconstruction with the village as the center. So when he talked about the national, he talked about the people, the poorest people, the people in the villages who were there, not in any abstract sense of being superior to any other nation. In fact, his writings on nationalism are a good example of that. If we place education in the hands of the government, they will attempt through that education to fulfill their interests, not ours, and recall Macaulay's minutes. They will so arrange that a farmer may remain only a farmer in his village. They will not bother to make him a true citizen of India. We can impart education according to our desire only if we have education in our hands. It's absurd both to beg and to order. He had this wonderful piece written in 1910, Tapobon, which is forest, Tapovan, and he introduced the new idea of education of feeling and distinguished it from the education of the senses and education of the intellect. The education of feeling consists of the realization of man and woman's bond of union with the universe through the spirit, through the soul, through the deeper intuition of feeling that you feel. The national system of education, through the national system of education, India should endeavor to discover and attain the characteristic truth of a civilization pursued through the centuries by her prophets, thinkers, and saints. Yet truth is not mainly commercialism, imperialism, or nationalism. The truth is universalism. Truth cannot be equated with commerce. Truth cannot be equated with imperialism, nor can truth be equated with nationalism. Truth has to be equated with universalism and with humanism. The Sri Shikha, I already mentioned Sri Siksha, the education of women, where he said that both men and women have to learn. Whatever is worth knowing is knowledge, and this should be equal for women and men. He made it clear that knowledge is the above imitation is not just about utility. Knowledge has to be there open for both women and men. He then talked about the method of education and said that the teacher is very critical. There has to be human contact for education to be there. Tagore's philosophy of education, he postulated three kinds of freedom: freedom of mind, freedom of heart, and freedom of will. Freedom of mind is supposed to be about adult system of concentration of mind, and a child can grow fully when he is given or she is given freedom to express himself, to expose the world as his own. And I will end with a quote with which all of you are familiar, and as I read through the quote, you will be able to understand the connection between Tagore's vision of education and these lines. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken into fragments by narrow domestic worlds, where words come out from depths of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arm towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the drearest desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Thank you.